Hello and welcome to Jessie Bear Book Club. Today we are continuing with our alternative history series. This chapter is called Anne Boleyn's Christmas of Triumph. She smiled as she watched her son Edward and 3-year-old Elizabeth playing with their new toys beside her throne. Edward was a healthy, handsome boy with his father's fair hair and blue eyes. He was the heir to the throne, the Prince of Wales, and the joy of her life, the living embodiment of her triumph. She had given birth to him after a long, difficult few years, filled with miscarriages, which had almost killed her. But she had survived, and so had her son. She had finally proven herself a true queen, and silenced all her enemies. Every time she looked at Edward, she remembered how happy Henry had been when he had seen his son for the first time. He had kissed her and thanked her for giving him the greatest gift of all. He had held a magnificent christening for the prince and invited all the nobles and the ambassadors to witness his glory, his heir. He had also announced that he would celebrate Christmas at Greenwich Palace and make it the most splendid feast England had ever seen over 12 days. And now here it was. Anne felt a surge of pride as she thought of her husband's love and devotion. He had been so attentive and caring during her confinement, visiting her every day and bringing her flowers and jewels. He had also showered her with gifts for the 12 days of Christmas, including a new set of pearls, a ruby ring, and a golden locket with their son's portrait inside. He had also told her she was the most beautiful and beloved woman in the world, and that he would never leave her or betray her again. She knew she was not the most beautiful, however. Even though this was her triumph, she was too skinny and more sallow than ever. Her eyes were too sharp. Living on the edge for years could not be softened by the birth of her son, she had unfortunately found out. Anne knew that she had won his heart completely once, years ago, and finally secured it with the birth of Edward, but she still caught him looking at pretty young girls. He was dancing with Jane Seymour right now, but she would have to live with it. Raging at him did little, and she wasn't as scared now that she had her boy, even though it still hurt. They had all wanted to get rid of her, these smiling faces watching her sit on her throne. Nicholas Carew, the de la Poles, all the old houses still wished to restore the old religion and undo all of Henry's reforms. They wanted the Princess Mary legitimized again and her own children declared bastards. Prince or no prince, she could still feel the hatred in the room. Anne shuddered as she recalled the horror of those days between the births of Elizabeth and Edward. She knew Henry loved her and that he would not let them tear her down now. She reassured herself with that every day, and so did he. Anne was Henry's only true wife. Their son Edward and daughter Elizabeth were his legitimate heirs. But she knew Henry was a flawed man and changeable. His liking for pale, meek Jane Seymour showed that. But he was also a great man. He was the King of England after all, and she was his queen. Nobody could take that away from her, not even Cromwell, who was pleading illness to stay at home during this festive occasion. She looked down at their son again and felt a surge of happiness. He was their miracle child, their blessing from God. He was the proof of Henry's love and of God's blessing. He was the hope for her future. She still had many enemies at home and abroad who wanted to destroy her. They still had to deal with the Pope's excommunication and Spain's invasion threat. France were also still refusing to acknowledge Elizabeth or Edward as legitimate and agree to any betrothals. But they also had many friends and supporters. They had the loyalty of the people who admired them for their courage and generosity. They had the strength of the English army and navy to defend them faithfully, and Henry could still lead an army proudly even if he was a little stouter. And most of all, Henry and Anne had Edward, their son, their bond. Anne smiled as the bells rang out for Christmas Eve. She got up from her throne and picked up Edward. Kissing him gently, she whispered in his ear, Merry Christmas, my darling. You're the best gift I ever received. You're my joy. Looking down, she seen that Elizabeth was jealously glaring at her, but she could ignore that. That is the end of this part of Alternative History, the Anne Boleyn Saga. If you enjoyed this, be sure to check out part 1, The Birth of Edward, and then, coming up, we have drumroll please, execution coming. So, let's see what happens. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram at Lady Jessica Riddell and check out my playlists about Alison Weir and Philippa Gregory. Until next time, be the most happy. Bye!